mo talaga.
Yes, ma'am! Happy ako! Sulit ang pagod ng 6 hours na lakat ano!
6 hours ka. Ano, ipapasahin mo?
Hindi po, bigay ko po tayo.
Bakit mo gusto ibigay sa kanya?
Ito mo, na-insert niyo po. Dahil
Picture this. An 80-year-old man standing under a blazing sun for 6 straight hours, refusing to sit down, refusing to leave, just so he could hand a tennis racket to a 21-year-old woman he had never met in person. No entourage, no VIP pass, just an old man, a gift, and a promise he'd made to himself months earlier. And when that moment finally happened, what he said to her would end up meaning more to an entire nation than any trophy ever could. This is the story of how one grandfather's quiet act of devotion became the emotional centerpiece of a night that was supposed to be about a rising tennis star and somehow turned into something much bigger than sport itself. It starts in Makati City at a mall activity center that on any normal day would host nothing more dramatic than a weekend sale or a kids' dance recital. But on this particular day, the place was unrecognizable. Crowds had begun forming before the sun was fully up, spilling out past the entrance, wrapping around corners, packed shoulder to shoulder along every railing on every floor. People weren't just curious. They were desperate for a glimpse of someone who just weeks earlier had rewritten what Filipinos believed was possible in international tennis. Her name is Alexandra Eala. And if you haven't heard of her yet, you're about to understand why an entire country stopped what it was doing to celebrate her. At only 21 years old, she became the first Filipino ever to reach the second week of a Grand Slam singles tournament at Wimbledon, one of the oldest and most prestigious stages in the sport. For a country of over 100 million people, most of whom had never had a tennis star to call their own, this wasn't just a nice sports headline. It was history, plain and simple. And when history happens, people want to be close to it, even for a few seconds. So, when her longtime sponsor organized a homecoming fan event to let everyday Filipinos meet her face-to-face, nobody expected the turnout that showed up. Fans didn't just come from around the corner. They came from Antipolo, from Naga City, hours away by road. Some even flying in from as far as London just to be in the same room as her. One elderly man made that trip in a wheelchair. Think about that for a second. A grandfather, likely dealing with mobility issues that make even a short walk exhausting, boarded a plane across continents because watching her play from a screen wasn't enough anymore. He needed to be there. That's the kind of pull this young woman had built in a matter of weeks. But of all the remarkable people who showed up that day, it was one particular man who ended up stealing the spotlight. And he did it without saying more than a few sentences. His name is Dusty Milan, 80 years old, a retired nurse who had spent a good chunk of his working life abroad in London before eventually returning home. Nobody would have picked him out of the crowd as anything special. He wasn't dressed for attention. He wasn't shouting or waving signs. He simply stood there patiently, holding on to something that clearly meant a great deal to him, a tennis racket he intended to give away. Milan had left his home in Antipolo early that morning, making the journey into Manila well before most people had even had their coffee. By 10 a.m., he was already at the venue, and from that point on, all he could do was wait. 1 hour passed, then 2. The sun climbed higher. The heat became brutal, and still more fans kept arriving, filling in every inch of space around him. Anyone else's age might have given up after an hour in that kind of heat, found some air conditioning, and called it a day. Not Milan. He stood his ground for 6 hours. 6 hours in punishing weather, on his feet, holding a racket, waiting for a chance that wasn't even guaranteed to come. What kept him there wasn't stubbornness. It was something deeper. Something he later admitted openly to reporters. He said that whenever Alexandra Eala played a match, he would sit and pray for her, treating each game almost like a spiritual event rather than just a sports broadcast. This wasn't casual fandom. This was a man who had quietly attached his hopes to her success long before Wimbledon made her a household name. In fact, Milan revealed that his belief in her potential went back even further than most people realized. He had followed her career for years, long before the breakthrough at Wimbledon, and he always felt in his gut that she was destined for something enormous on the world stage. That kind of early faith is rare. Most people jump on board once someone's already famous. Milan had been rooting for her, when she was still just a name buried in local sports coverage. And there's another layer to this that makes his dedication even more remarkable. At some point last year, Milan had fallen seriously ill during a vacation. Health scares like that tend to shift a person's priorities, make them reconsider what actually matters and what they want to do with the time they have left. And somehow, through recovery and everything that came with it, his commitment to supporting this young athlete never wavered. If anything, it seemed to deepen. So when the opportunity finally arose to meet her in person, there was no version of events where he was going to miss it. Heat or no heat, 6 hours or 16. When Alexandra Eala finally emerged from backstage that evening, the reaction from the crowd was immediate and overwhelming. The noise that erupted was the kind you'd expect at a concert, not a mall meet and greet. She herself seemed genuinely startled by the scale of it, letting out a surprised remark about the size of the crowd before quickly composing herself to greet everyone. The event, hosted by her sponsor Globe, had been designed to give fans an intimate look at her, complete with interactive games, storytelling segments, and open opportunities for autographs and photos. It was meant to feel personal, a break from the formal, guarded world of professional sports. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. Filled with laughter, screaming fans, and the kind of electric energy you only get when a community gathers to celebrate one of their own. But amid all that noise and excitement, there was a quieter thread running underneath it. One that would end up defining the entire night. Eventually, it was Milan's turn. After 6 hours of standing, waiting, sweating under a sun that showed no mercy, he finally stood face to face with the woman he had prayed for through every set, every match point, every headline. He didn't have a long speech prepared. He didn't need one. He simply looked at her and said 5 words that would end up echoing across news outlets and social media in the days that followed. I hope you'll get to the top. 5 words. That's it. No elaborate tribute. No rehearsed monologue. Nothing performative about it. Just a plain, honest hope from an old man who had spent months, maybe years, quietly believing in her from a distance. And according to those who witnessed it, Eala was visibly moved. This wasn't a polite, practiced smile for the cameras. Something about the simplicity and sincerity of what he said seemed to cut through all the noise of the event and land somewhere real. She responded with a promise, telling him that she would keep trying her best, that she would push herself to get there. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was a quiet, sincere exchange between two people who, on paper, had almost nothing in common. An 80-year-old retired nurse and a 21-year-old rising tennis star, connected only by 6 hours of patience and a shared belief that hard work and hope actually mean something. Later, when reporters caught up with Milan to ask about the moment, he described it simply. He said she seemed happy when he told her that, and that she reassured him she would give it everything she had. There was no exaggeration in how he told the story, no attempt to inflate his own role in it. He wasn't looking for recognition. He genuinely just wanted her to know that people believed in her. And here's the thing that makes this story resonate the way it does. This wasn't an isolated case of one particularly devoted fan going above and beyond. Milan's 6-hour wait was extreme, sure, but the spirit behind it was shared by nearly everyone in that building. Take the 12-year-old girl who showed up hoping to one day follow in Eala's footsteps as a tennis player herself. When she finally got her moment to meet her idol, she admitted she was completely starstruck, unable to find the words she'd probably rehearsed 100 times. For a kid that age, meeting someone who looks like you, sounds like you, comes from the same streets and same background, and is now competing on the biggest stages in the world, that's not just exciting. That's proof that the path is actually possible. Or consider the 78-year-old woman who arrived clutching a thick photo album she had put together herself, filled with printed images tracing Eala's career from her earliest days in junior competitions all the way up through the historic Wimbledon run. That's not something you throw together the night before. That's a project built over months, maybe years, a labor of love. Then there was a digital artist who had waited a staggering 8 hours, even longer than Milan, just to have a piece of his own artwork signed. When asked afterward whether the wait had been worth it, he didn't hesitate. He said it absolutely was, adding that Eala's humility and down-to-earth nature made every minute feel justified. Story after story, the same pattern kept repeating itself. People weren't just excited to see a celebrity. They were showing up to say thank you, to express something that had clearly been building inside them for a long time. Something about pride, about identity, about finally having someone on the world stage who looked like them and represented where they came from. Eala herself seemed to understand the weight of what was happening around her. Speaking to the crowd, she expressed genuine gratitude, saying she had felt the love and support from Filipinos throughout every match she played, and that coming home to an event like this reminded her exactly why she does what she does. She spoke about wanting to inspire the next generation and elevating Filipino talent on a stage that historically hadn't given many Filipino athletes, especially in tennis, much room to shine. And it's worth pausing here to talk about just how unprecedented this level of attention actually is for Philippine tennis. This isn't a sport with a deep established fan base in the country the way basketball or boxing has traditionally dominated. Tennis historically has existed on the margins of Filipino sports culture, respected but rarely celebrated on a national scale, which is exactly why what's happening around Alexandra Eala right now feels so significant. Even prominent figures from outside the Philippines have taken notice. Andy Roddick, the former world number 1 and U.S. Open champion, weighed in publicly on what's unfolding around her. He pushed back hard against anyone dismissing the excitement as just another passing trend, insisting instead that what she's building is a genuine movement, one creating an entirely new segment of tennis fandom that essentially didn't exist just a couple of years ago. And maybe that's the real story buried underneath all the crowds and the 6-hour waits and the 80-year-old man with his racket. It's not really about one tennis match or even one tournament run, no matter how historic. It's about what happens when a country that has waited a long time for a moment like this finally gets one. For decades, Filipino sports fans have had their heroes in boxing, in basketball, occasionally in other individual sports, but rarely if ever in tennis at this level. So when someone finally breaks through, the emotional response isn't just excitement. It's relief. It's validation. It's an entire population collectively exhaling and thinking, finally, someone is showing the world what we're capable of. That's why an 80-year-old man was willing to stand in blistering heat for 6 hours. That's why a 78-year-old woman built a photo album spanning years of a young athlete's career. That's why a grandfather flew from London in a wheelchair just to be present in that room. None of these people were doing it because tennis as a sport suddenly became more entertaining to watch. They were doing it because Alexandra Eala had become something bigger than a tennis player. She had become a symbol, proof that a kid from the Philippines could compete with and beat the best in the world on a stage that had almost never included Filipino names before. As the event wound down and fans slowly began filtering out of the building, satisfied, exhausted, and clutching their signed items and photographs, Eala prepared for what was coming next. She was set to fly out to the United States for the Washington Open, the next stop on a schedule that was only getting more demanding as her profile continued to rise. But she wasn't leaving empty-handed. Along with her equipment and her team, she was carrying a racket, a specific one, handed to her by an 80-year-old man who had waited 6 hours in unbearable heat just to give it to her personally. And more than that racket, she was carrying the weight and the honor of representing a nation that had clearly decided she was theirs fully and completely. In the grand scheme of professional sports, that exchange will never show up in her record book. It won't be remembered alongside her match statistics or her tournament rankings. But for everyone who was in that room, and for the millions who later saw the story spread online, it became the single most human moment of the entire event. A reminder that behind every headline about historic sporting achievements, there are real people, ordinary people, standing for hours in the heat, just hoping to say thank you to someone who made them believe, even for a little while, that anything is possible. Like, subscribe, and share my video. My channel name, Tennis Unfiltered.